He told me to move out of the house I had nurtured for 14 years, just so his new person could have space to decorate. I smiled, said okay, signed the temporary asset agreement, and quietly packed my things. Then I placed something on the living room wall that he could not take down without destroying his own life. He thought I was the quiet suburban housewife. He forgot I built his entire life with my own 2 hands, so I knew exactly which pin to pull to make it all collapse. My name is Riley Hall. I am 35 years old. Though many days I feel less like a person and more like a collection of support functions, I am the woman who paused a promising career in communications halfway through my master's, so my husband could complete his medical residency. I am the woman who managed the cross-country moves, first for his fellowship, then for the perfect job, the one that made him a local star. I am the coordinator of our lives in Maple Ridge, in the affluent suburbs where the lawns are a fierce, manicured green and every brick-faced colonial has a 3-car garage. Our life is a portrait of success, the right private school for our 2 children, the membership at the golf club we rarely use, the endless stream of hospital fundraisers. I am a freelance event coordinator, a title that sounds professional but really means I schedule high-paying corporate parties around soccer practice, dental appointments, and the expectation that I will always be home when Adrian walks in the door. At those fundraisers, surrounded by the scent of expensive perfume and catered beef, Adrian's colleagues, other surgeons with equally exhausted, polished wives, love to raise a glass to me. Riley, you are the foundation, they always say, their voices slurring slightly with expensive scotch. Adrian, you know she's the foundation. Couldn't do it without her. I was, in fact, thinking about foundations when the world cracked open. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was standing in the dining room, holding a fabric swatch of dove-gray linen to the wall, wondering if it was too somber. I was trying to make the house feel new again, to fix the staleness that had crept in. My phone buzzed. It was Adrian, calling from Ravenscrest Medical Center, the gleaming institution where he reigned as the top cardiothoracic surgeon. He was a god in green scrubs, a man who held life and death in his hands and never let anyone forget it. I answered, pressing the linen swatch against the paint. Hey, do you think this gray washes out the trim? A pause, not an empty pause, but a heavy one, freighted with something calculated. I'm not calling about the curtains, Riley, he said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was the voice he used when delivering bad news to a patient's family, distant, professional, and final. I need you to move out for a while. The fabric swatch slipped from my fingers and drifted to the hardwood floor. What are you talking about? I want you to move out, he repeated, speaking slower this time, as if I were dense, as if I were the one failing to understand a simple instruction. Celine is going to help me rearrange the furniture. She needs the space to get the decor right, something that actually suits my taste. Celine. Dr. Celine Porter, the new anesthesiologist who had transferred in from somewhere on the West Coast 6 months ago, younger, sharper, with that effortless, trendy look I could never pull off, the kind of woman who wears stilettos to rounds and calls it professionalism. I leaned against the wall I had painted myself. I don't understand. Adrian, you want me to leave my home, so your mistress can pick out throw pillows. A sigh, that deep, impatient sigh he reserved for me, the one that said I was being difficult, that I was an obstacle. Don't be dramatic, Riley. It's not working anymore, and you know it. This house, it's just... He searched for the word, and the one he found was a scalpel. It's too much you. Every room, every wall, it's all you. I need a fresh space. I'm starting a new phase in my life, and I need it to feel like mine. A new phase. He said it as if he were leasing a new BMW, not detonating a 14-year marriage. I should have screamed. I should have thrown the antique lamp on the sideboard, the one I'd spent 3 months restoring. I should have cataloged every sacrifice, every 24-hour shift I waded through alone, every medical journal I'd helped him edit when his syntax was clumsy, every social event I'd navigated to smooth the egos of his superiors. But I didn't. I just stood there, realizing this wasn't just an affair. This was an erasure. This was a hostile takeover. He wasn't just replacing me with a new woman. He was attempting to delete my existence from the very home I had built. He wanted to strip my identity from the walls, to scrub away the scent of the wife who knew him before he was Dr. Blake, the surgical pioneer. Adrian lives and dies by his public image. He is meticulous, charming, and utterly obsessed with how he is perceived by the hospital board, by his wealthy patients, by the entire ecosystem of Maple Ridge. He couldn't just have an affair. He had to rebrand his entire life, and that required a new set. And Celine, ambitious and smart. She wasn't just a fling, she was his chosen successor. And in that cold, silent dining room, I understood something else. You do not ask your wife to move out, so your mistress can redecorate, unless you are absolutely, unequivocally certain of the outcome. They hadn't just discussed this. They had planned it. They had timelines. They had looked at me quiet, supportive, foundational. Wryly and concluded I would be compliant. They had already decided I would pack my suitcases, find a respectable condo downtown, and negotiate my exit quietly while they argued over paint chips. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my patience for weakness. They mistook my support for subservience. A sound came from my throat. It was quiet, dry, and terrifyingly calm. Okay. On the other end of the line, Adrian was silent. This was not in his script. He was prepared for hysteria, for tears, for the messy, emotional fallout he so despised. He was not prepared for okay. Okay, he repeated, his own surgical confidence faltering for just a fraction of a second. Yes, I said. My voice sounded strange, even to my own ears. It was clear. It was sharp. It was cold. Okay, Adrian, I'll move out. Just tell me when. That quick, easy agreement was the first click of the lock. It bought me time. It made him lower his guard, made him feel superior and in control. He thought my okay meant surrender. It meant war. He wants to hang her things on the wall, and he wants a fresh space, a new phase, a public gallery of his new life. He can have it. But first, he'll have to look at mine. I ended the call. I did not cry. The grief was there, a solid, black stone in my stomach, but something else was rising to coat it. Ice. It was the shift. The precise moment the white-hot burn of betrayal freezes over, becoming something hard and useful. I stopped being the wife. I stopped being the victim. I became an observer. I looked around the dining room, not as my home, but as a strategic map. I was an event coordinator. My entire career was built on logistics, timelines, and budgets. My job is to know exactly where the stress points are, which vendor will crack under pressure, and what contingency plan to enact when the keynote speaker cancels. And Adrian, my God, he had just handed me the entire floor plan of his destruction. I stooped and picked up the dove-gray linen swatch. It was time to start planning a new event. It's not as if it happened in a single, blinding flash. That's the movie version. In reality, infidelity is a slow leak. It's a series of small, mundane observations that you explain away, because the alternative is unthinkable. My mind went back, sifting through the last few months. It started around the time Dr. Celine Porter arrived, maybe 6 or 7 months ago. Suddenly, the hospital was always short-staffed. Adrian, who had meticulously crafted his schedule to avoid excessive call, was suddenly stuck in surgery 3 nights a week. It's this new anesthesiologist, he'd complained, tossing his green scrubs into the hamper. She's efficient, but she's ruffling feathers, slowing down the turnover in the OR. Everything is backed up. He was using her as an excuse. I saw that now. He wasn't stuck in the OR with her. He was stuck in wherever they went. The hospital, the surgical wing, a dark on-call room. It was pathetically convenient. Then there were the signals. The tiny red flags your subconscious notes, even when your conscious mind refuses to. There was the perfume. I am a soap and water and light floral person. This was different. A heavy, expensive scent of sandalwood and something sharp, almost citrusy. It clung to the collar of his dress shirts on nights he worked late, not just his scrubs. I'd convinced myself it was just the smell of the nurse's station, someone he'd brushed past. I remembered the credit card statements. We have our joint accounts for the house, the school, the investments, but he kept a separate card, a supplemental one from our main bank. For hospital expenses and travel, he'd said. I never checked it. I paid the bills, but I respected his space. I'm not the kind of woman who snoops. I always believed that checking a man's phone, reading his emails, or tracking his expenses was the behavior of an insecure, jealous woman. I was not that woman. I was his partner, his foundation. But the bill came in paper form. I'd seen a charge, just a line item I almost skipped. The Gilded Lantern, a high-end, ridiculously trendy restaurant downtown that specialized in 10-course tasting menus and cocktails that smoked. Adrian hated places like that. He called them all presentation and no substance. Yet there it was, a charge for $250. Time-stamped at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday, he was supposedly covering a double shift. Even then, I'd rationalized. He must have taken a resident out, a recruitment dinner. The rationalizations stopped about 3 weeks ago. I was cleaning out his car, the sleek, black SUV he adored, because our son had spilled an entire box of raisins in the back. While wiping down the passenger side floor mat, I knocked his briefcase. It wasn't locked. It fell open, and a small, leather-bound folder slid out. It was full of fabric swatches. Not medical journals, not patient files. Thick, expensive swatches of linen, velvet, and brushed cotton in shades of beige, slate blue, and a deep, angry maroon. Tucked inside was a business card for an exclusive, high-end interior designer in the city, one I'd once suggested we consult, only for Adrian to scoff at the price. And stapled to the card was a small, folded piece of notepaper. The handwriting was not his. It was sharp, angular, and confident. A. Blake living room. Walls eggshell white. Matte finish sofa. Brown leather. Clean lines. Replace all existing art. A. Blake living room. Not our living room. A. Blake. And replace all existing art. All the art I had sourced. The paintings from local artists. The framed photographs of our children. She hadn't just seen the room. She had itemized it for execution. That was the moment the ice truly formed. The request for me to move out so Celine could decorate wasn't a spontaneous, cruel impulse. It was the final item on their project timeline. She had been in my house while I was coordinating some tech CEO's retirement party or volunteering at the school book fair. This woman had walked on my rugs. She had stood in my living room, surveyed my life's work, and found it lacking. She had assessed the space, taken measurements, and planned its demolition. I didn't storm into the house. I didn't call him and scream. As an event coordinator, my brain is wired for logistics, for cause and effect, for contingency. When a crisis hits, I don't panic. I make a list. I sat in the back seat of his car for a very long time, the smell of leather and stale raisins mixing with the phantom scent of sandalwood. I took a photo of the note with my phone. I tucked the folder back into his briefcase, exactly as I had found it. I finished cleaning up the raisins. My mind started to pull up other files, a flash of the Ravenscrest Winter Gala. 4 months prior, Adrian was on stage, accepting yet another Physician of the Year award. He'd smiled, gripping the glass trophy, and pointed right at me at our table near the front. I can only do this because of my wife, Riley, he'd said, his voice resonating with that perfect, humble charm. She is the reason I can do any of this. She is my rock. I remembered beaming, my cheeks hurting from smiling. I also remembered, now, a flicker of movement at the back of the ballroom. Dr. Celine Porter, in a backless silver dress, standing near the bar. She wasn't clapping. She was just watching him, her eyes intense, with an expression I had mistaken for professional admiration. It wasn't. It was the look of an investor appraising an asset. They had been performing, both of them, The late nights, the stress, his public declarations of gratitude, it was all part of the narrative. They were building a case, not just for their relationship, but for the inevitable. Civilized transition, the brilliant but overworked surgeon, worn down by a life that no longer fit him, finding new energy with a dynamic new colleague. The old wife, the foundation, would be thanked, handsomely provided for, and expected to recede gracefully into the suburbs, retaining her dignity and, above all, her silence. The entire medical community, the entire social structure of Maple Ridge, was primed to accept this story. That was when I truly understood. To attack people like Adrian and Celine, people who live by their curated public image, you cannot use the weapons of a scorned wife, hysteria, accusations, public scenes that would only make me look unhinged, confirming their narrative that I was the problem he needed to escape. No, to attack people obsessed with their image, you must attack their records. You must attack their professional ethics. You must dismantle the very narrative they've built, brick by brick, in front of the audience they value most. I walked back into the house Celine had already condemned. I looked at the walls she planned to strip. I looked at the sofa she wanted to replace. From that moment, I wasn't looking for evidence to hold on. I was looking for evidence to destroy. I needed a lawyer, but not the kind who advertised compassionate counsel on suburban billboards. I needed a butcher. Maple Ridge was a medical town, and most local attorneys knew which side their bread was buttered on. They specialized in amicable dissolutions for the Ravenscrest elite, smoothing things over, protecting reputations and stock options, ensuring the hospital's image remained untarnished. I did not want amicable. I wanted Marjorie Hale. Marjorie's office was not in one of the gleaming glass towers downtown. It was a cramped third-floor walk-up above a Greek bakery, an office that smelled faintly of old paper and cinnamon. The furniture was from the 1980s. The carpet was a depressing shade of brown, and Marjorie herself looked like she'd been carved from granite. She wore a severe black suit, drank lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug, and did not offer me a tissue when my voice cracked. She was perfect. She had a reputation for eviscerating bankers, and her absolute favorite hobby was cross-examining doctors. I sat opposite her desk, a wall of faded legal binders at her back. I told her the story, keeping my voice as steady as I could. I told her about the 14 years, the sacrifices, the children. I told her about the phone call. I told her the line that had broken me. I need you to move out so Celine can redecorate. Marjorie listened without interrupting. She didn't offer a single word of sympathy. When I finished, she steepled her fingers, her gaze sharp enough to cut glass. I've seen this play before. Mrs. Hall, your husband is a classic case. He's a god in the OR, so he believes he is a god everywhere else. He thinks he's smarter than you, smarter than the hospital board, and certainly smarter than me. She leaned forward, and her voice dropped to a conspiratorial growl. He's wrong. Now, here is what you are going to do. You are not, under any circumstances, moving out of that house. It is your residence as much as his. You will smile. You will be cooperative. You will tell him you just need a few weeks to organize the logistics. You will buy yourself time. And then, I asked. And then, she said, you become an auditor. Get me every financial document you can find. Bank statements, investment portfolios, tax returns, retirement accounts. I want the last 5 years. You are the wife. You have access. I want to see where every single dollar has gone. She tapped her pen on the desk. Pay special attention to his personal expense accounts. Anything you don't normally review. Marjorie fixed me with that predatory stare. A piece of free advice, Mrs. Hall. In my 25 years of experience, men like your husband, powerful, arrogant, image-obsessed surgeons, they rarely just cheat. They commit fraud. That night, I waited. The house was still. The children were asleep, their breathing soft and rhythmic through the baby monitor. Adrian was, according to his text message, in a complex aortic dissection, won't be home until morning. He was probably sleeping with Celine. But for once, I didn't care. I went to his study. It was a room I had designed for him: mahogany shelves, a heavy leather chair, a framed collection of his diplomas. Behind a large, imposing painting of a stormy New England seascape was the household safe. He thought I only knew the combination for the top section, where we kept passports and emergency cash. He forgot that I was the one who had read the manual and set the master administrative code when we first bought it. I opened the secondary compartment. It was where he kept what he called his private professional files, stacks of old patient logs, research papers, and, just as Marjorie had predicted, financial binders. I pulled out the tax returns for the last 5 years, the statements for our joint investment accounts, and the files for his 401k. And then I found it, a slim, blue binder I didn't recognize. It wasn't labeled Blake Family, it was labeled Silverline Wellness Group, LLC. I had never heard of it. I opened it. Inside were bank statements from a regional bank we didn't use for our personal accounts. The LLC had been formed 2.5 years ago. I scanned the transactions. There were no clients. There were no expenses for wellness. There was only one activity: money coming in. I traced the deposits back. They were monthly electronic transfers, routed from Adrian's supplemental professional expenses credit card, the very one I never checked. The transfers were large: $10,000 one month, $15,000 the next, sometimes 5. It was inconsistent, but it was constant. He was systematically siphoning money from our shared income pool and parking it in a private company. The next morning, my hands steady, I called Marjorie. I relayed the information. I could practically hear her smile through the phone. Well, she purred. Dr. Blake has a slush fund. This isn't just cheating, Riley. This is calculated asset hiding. He's been planning this. I felt a cold sickness spread through my chest. He met Celine 6 months ago. Exactly, Marjorie said. He's been hiding money for 2 years. This means he was planning to leave you, or at least planning to financially insulate himself from you, long before Dr. Porter ever showed up. She isn't the reason for the divorce. She's just the upgrade he chose when he was ready to execute the plan. His words replayed in my head. I need a fresh space, a new phase in my life. It wasn't an impulse. It was a strategy. I was not just being replaced. I was being methodically, financially, and emotionally phased out. So we fight him on the money, I said, my voice flat. We will, Marjorie assured me. But first, we need to know what else he's hiding, and we need to know who she is. That afternoon, I hired a private investigator, not for grainy photos outside a motel. I didn't need proof of the affair. Adrian had handed me that himself. I paid a man Marjorie recommended, a quiet, boring-looking former detective, for a simple, half-day digital trace. Just an employment and education background check, I told him, sliding the cash envelope across the diner table. Dr. Celine Porter, I want to know everywhere she worked before she landed at Ravenscrest. The report arrived in my inbox 48 hours later. It was mostly what I expected. Top of her class in medical school, prestigious residency in California, glowing recommendations, and then her most recent position before moving to Maple Ridge staff anesthesiologist for 18 months at a private clinic called the Westlake Reproductive Institute. I froze. My blood turned to ice water. Westlake. I knew that name better than my own. I looked at the framed photos on my mantel. My 2 children. My son, 8 years old. My daughter, 5. Both of them were miracles. Both of them were the result of a grueling, emotionally devastating, 2-year journey through in vitro fertilization. When we'd finally accepted we needed help, I had researched every fertility center in the state. I'd preferred the university hospitals program, known for its ethical research and transparent data, but Adrian had been immovable. No, he had insisted, with that calm, surgical finality he used to end arguments. We're using Westlake. I know people there. Their success rates are the best in the country. Period. They're aggressive. They get results. And they'll take care of us. I'd been so desperate, so broken. I had agreed. I had yielded to his professional opinion. Celine worked at Westlake. And I remembered something else, a whisper of a scandal from a few years ago, a story in the local news that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. A disgruntled former employee at Westlake had claimed the clinic was manipulating data and fudging success rates, but the clinic had sued. The reporter was reassigned, and the story evaporated. I looked at the name on my screen, Silverline Wellness Group. I looked at the name of the clinic, Westlake Reproductive Institute. A terrifying dark shape was beginning to form. Adrian, the husband who insisted on Westlake, Celine, the mistress who worked at Westlake, and Silverline, the secret LLC he used to hide money. This was not a divorce. This was a conspiracy. Marjorie could have the bank accounts. I was going after something much bigger. I wasn't going to fight my husband over furniture. I wasn't just going to expose an affair. I decided, in that moment, that I would not be driven out of the dark. I was going to be the one to bring the light into the very room they wanted to decorate. And I would make sure it was bright enough to burn them both. The Westlake Reproductive Institute. The name echoed in my head. A cold bell tolling. My own medical records, the ones from the fertility treatments, were not in Adrian's study. I kept them in a locked, fireproof document box in the back of my own closet, tucked under my winter sweaters. I retrieved it, my hands feeling strange and numb, as if they belonged to someone else. The files were thick, 2 years of my life reduced to graphs, hormone levels, consent forms, and billing statements. I had read them so many times, searching for answers, but I had never read them with suspicion. I spread them out on my bed. I was looking for a name, not Celine's. She would have been a rotator. Too junior to be a primary signatory. I was looking for the supervising physician, and I found him. Dr. Marcus Lyle. His signature was on almost every page. The initial consultation, the retrieval authorizations, the final transfer approvals. I remembered him. A nervous man with kind eyes who always seemed overworked. He was the one who had finally called us with the news that I was pregnant with our son. He had seemed genuinely happy for us. And then, abruptly, he had vanished from Maple Ridge. It was about 4 years ago, shortly after our daughter was born. The gossip among the hospital wives was that he'd had some kind of burnout, a family emergency, and moved away overnight. No one knew the details. Dr. Marcus Lyle. He was the signatory. He was the one who had been there. I went back to Adrian's study, to the old desktop computer. He was a digital hoarder, a man who believed his every thought was worth preserving. He never deleted anything. He just archived. His old email client was still synced to a massive external hard drive. I turned it on, the machine whirring to life in the silent house. I typed Lyle into the search bar. The search took several minutes, churning through gigs of archived professional correspondence. Most of it was standard hospital announcements, research papers, gala invitations. And then, a thread appeared. The sender was Marcus Lyle. The recipient was Adrian Blake. The date 4.5 years ago, right after my daughter's successful transfer. The subject line read, Protocol Query, Batch 11A. I clicked it. My blood felt like it was slowing down, turning to sludge. The email was from Lyle, and it was terrified. It was professional, couched in medical jargon, but the panic was clear. Adrian, it began, I cannot continue to sign off on these protocol deviations without a formal written directive from the ethics board. The pressure from your department to manage outcomes is putting my license at risk. We are altering patient directives based on verbal-only consults. This is not embryo selection. This is active specimen manipulation. I need a formal paper trail for this. I am not comfortable proceeding. I scrolled down, my hand shaking so hard I could barely control the mouse. Adrian's reply was sent 2 hours later, at 3 a.m. Marcus, you are being hysterical. We are not manipulating anything. We are protecting these families. We are using cutting-edge genetic insight to prevent devastating, tragic outcomes. This is the very definition of proactive medicine. You are giving these women the greatest possible gift a healthy child. Keep your personal log if it makes you feel better. But do not send me an email like this again. We have a very beneficial arrangement. Ravenscrest and Westlake. Do not jeopardize it. Do your job. A beneficial arrangement. Pressure from his department. Active specimen manipulation. I found Dr. Marcus Lyle an hour later through a series of public record searches. He was not easy to find. He was practicing at a small, cash-only family clinic in Millwater, a depressed town an hour's drive north, a place defined by shuttered factories and fast food chains. I was there by 10 a.m. the next morning. The clinic was wedged between a pawn shop and a laundromat. The waiting room was full of tired mothers and coughing children. I gave a fake name to the receptionist and said it was an emergency. When Marcus Lyle opened the door to the exam room, he looked like a ghost. He was gray, thin, and the kindness in his eyes had been replaced by a deep, hollowed-out weariness. He saw me, and his face, already pale, turned the color of ash. He knew, instantly, who I was. "Mrs. Blake," he whispered, closing the door. "Riley, my God." I read the emails. "Dr. Lyle," I said. My voice was a dead calm monotone. "The ones between you and my husband. I want to know what he made you do." He sat down on the small rolling stool, his white coat hanging off his frame. He looked like a man who hadn't slept properly in 4 years. "He destroyed my career," Lyle whispered, not to me, but to the floor. "I built that program. I believed in it. And he and the board at Ravenscrest, they turned it into something else." "What did you do?" I asked. "It was a joint program," he explained, his voice rushing, as if the dam had finally broken. "Ravenscrest provided funding, and in exchange, Westlake offered priority genetic consultations for high-value Ravenscrest staff and donors. It started simply. We'd screen embryos, standard practice." He stopped, rubbing his face. Then Adrian started pushing. He was the head of cardio, a superstar. He used his influence. He said, "What if we could do more? What if we could prevent things we can't test for yet?" He started identifying cases with what he called unfavorable paternal genetic factors, and he pressured us. He pressured me to manage them. "Manage them how?" I said. Lyle finally looked up, his eyes swimming with a terrible, watery shame. "By replacement, by swapping the paternal specimen, without telling the patient, the wife, he would get the husband to sign a private consent form, assuring them it was to optimize the outcome, and we were instructed to use a pre-screened donor sample instead. We were told to destroy the original paternal sample and alter the log." The room tilted. The air was too thick to breathe. "Unfavorable paternal genetic factors," I repeated. "Like what?" "Things he specialized in," Lyle said, his voice cracking. "Things he saw every day in his OR, specifically hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, HCM, a thickening of the heart muscle. It's genetic. It's a primary cause of sudden cardiac death in young people." He paused and delivered the final, fatal blow. "Your husband carries the marker for an extremely aggressive variant of HCM, Riley. He's known about it since medical school. He built his entire career on being the man who could fix the very disease he was terrified of passing on." The pieces slammed into place, so hard they knocked the wind out of me. The affair, the redecorating, the insults it all evaporated, revealing the real, monstrous truth beneath. 8 years ago, 5 years ago, I had laid on a sterile table, hopeful and terrified, my body pumped full of hormones, praying for a child, and in a room down the hall, my husband, the brilliant, celebrated Dr. Adrian Blake, had signed a piece of paper. He had made a cold, clinical decision to not have his biological children with me. He had chosen an anonymous donor. He had watched me carry, birth, and raise 2 beautiful children, knowing they were not his. He had done it to protect his legacy, to create a perfect family free of his own genetic flaws. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it was almost silent. It was the sound of a universe collapsing. "He never told me," I whispered. He chose my children's DNA without my consent. He said he was protecting you, Lyle said feebly. Protecting the children. And Celine Porter, I asked, the name feeling like poison on my tongue. Lyle nodded, looking away again. She was a rotator in anesthesiology at Westlake back then. During your second round. Smart. Ambitious. She figured out what was happening. She saw the discrepancies in the logs. Instead of reporting it, she made herself useful. She covered for him. She helped. Managed the paperwork. When I was forced out, she was already close to him, already moving up at Ravenscrest. They weren't just new lovers. They were old co-conspirators. He's forcing me out of the house, I said, my voice empty. He wants her to redecorate. Lyle looked at me, and a flicker of the man he used to be, a flicker of anger, returned. He's a monster, a charming, brilliant, celebrated monster. You said he told you to keep your personal log, I said, remembering the email. Did you? Lyle hesitated. They made me sign an NDA. They threatened to have me charged if I ever spoke of it. They paid me to disappear. Did you keep the log, Marcus? He walked over to a battered gray filing cabinet, unlocked the bottom drawer, and reached deep into the back. He pulled out a thick, black-bound ledger. It was a simple, old-fashioned procedure log. I couldn't destroy it, he said. I knew they'd shredded the official copies, but I made my own, my insurance policy. He handed it to me. I don't know if I'm brave or just stupid, he said. I opened the book. My hands were perfectly steady. He had kept meticulous records. I found the dates for both of my transfers. Next to the codes for the procedure, in the margin, was a small, handwritten notation. Specimen replacement approved. A. Blake. It was Adrian's signature, arrogant, sharp, and undeniable. I closed the book. I put it in my tote bag. You aren't stupid, Dr. Lyle, I said. You're my star witness. I walked out of the clinic, leaving him standing by the empty filing cabinet. I got into my car and sat for a long time in the strip mall parking lot, the black ledger heavy on the passenger seat. The man I married had not just betrayed our vows, he had violated my body. He had lied about the very children I was raising. The affair was a symptom. The disease was Adrian himself. I was no longer a wife scorned. I was a victim of a profound medical deception, and I had just picked up the weapon that would end my husband's career. When I got home, the house was quiet, except for the sound of the television in the family room. The black ledger from Lyle's office was a physical weight on the passenger seat, heavy as an anchor. I left it there, for the moment. I walked inside. My son, who is 8, was lying on his stomach on the rug, meticulously coloring a map for a school project. My daughter, 5, was curled up next to him, watching a cartoon. Her thumb loosely in her mouth. They were healthy, they were loud, they were happy. They looked up when I came in, their faces bright and uncomplicated. Hey, Mom, my son said, not looking up from his map. Is dinner soon? Soon, honey, I said. I went into the kitchen, my hands gripping the cold granite of the counter. A wave of nausea, so profound it buckled my knees, washed over me, not for what I had lost, but for what they had done. They had made me a stranger to my own children's origins. They had turned my motherhood, the only thing in my life that felt pure, into a component of their conspiracy. My daughter padded into the kitchen and wrapped her arms around my leg. I'm hungry. I looked down at her, her eyes, her hair. I had spent 5 years looking for Adrian in her features and been baffled when I couldn't find him. I'd chalked it up to recessive genes. I had been a fool. I bent down and pulled her into a hug, burying my face in her hair, which smelled like apple shampoo and the outdoors. In that instant, the rage clarified into a single, diamond-hard point. They are mine. It didn't matter what Adrian's signature on a form had dictated. It didn't matter whose DNA was swimming in their cells. I had carried them. I had birthed them. I was their mother. They were my children. But I knew, with chilling certainty, how a court would see it, how Adrian's lawyers would spin it. He wasn't just planning to redecorate the house, he was planning to take my children. This was the ace up his sleeve. When I fought him on the asset division, when I refused to go quietly, he would wait until I was at my most vulnerable. He would let me file for primary custody, and then he would deploy this, "Your Honor, Mrs. Hall is unstable, and furthermore, she has been lying. The children are not biologically mine. I am simply trying to protect them." He would paint me as unhinged, and this lie, his lie, as my own. I had to control it. I had to detonate this bomb myself, in a way that left him covered in the shrapnel, not me. I picked up my phone and walked into the garage. Closing the door behind me, I dialed Marjorie Hale. "Riley," she answered, her voice all business. "What do you have?" "You were right," I said, my voice low and shaking, not with fear, but with adrenaline. "It's not just cheating, it's fraud, but it's not financial." I told her everything. I told her about Westlake. I told her about Dr. Marcus Lyle. I told her about the logbook, the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and Adrian's signature authorizing a specimen replacement. I told her he had chosen my children's genetics without my knowledge or consent. For the first time since I'd met her, Marjorie Hale was completely silent. The pause stretched for a full 10 seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost all its cynical growl. It was cold with sheer, unadulterated shock. "My God," she whispered. "Riley, this is not a divorce. This is medical battery. This is a level of calculated deception I have never. This is criminal." "He will use it to take the kids," I said, pacing the concrete floor. "He will say they aren't his." "He won't get the chance," Marjorie snapped, her voice turning to steel. "Because we are not going to file a divorce petition. We are going to file a criminal complaint, but not yet. You're right. He's arrogant. He's documented everything. We need to move perfectly." She paused. "Listen to me, Riley. This is bigger than my office. This goes way beyond family law. I know a man, an investigator with the state medical board. His name is Ethan Cole. He's been sniffing around Ravenscrest for months, trying to find a link between their offshore charitable funds and Westlake. He suspects the hospital was paying the clinic for something. He just couldn't find a motive, or a victim. You, Riley, you're not just a victim, you're the whole case." I met Ethan Cole 2 days later, in a sterile conference room in a downtown office building. He was the opposite of Marjorie. He was young, wore a well-tailored suit, and had a calm, almost gentle demeanor. He didn't look like a bulldog. He looked like a priest, someone you would confess to. He listened to my story, his eyes never leaving mine. I slid the black logbook across the polished table. He opened it. He read Lyle's notations. He looked at Adrian's signature. Then he closed the book, slid it back to me, and folded his hands. "Mrs. Hall," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "For over a year, we have been tracking a series of anonymous donations from a Ravenscrest-controlled foundation into Westlake's operating budget. We also tracked significant consulting payments from Westlake's accounts directly into your husband's Silverline Wellness LLC. We thought it was a kickback scheme. We never imagined this. He was paying to have his own genetic line erased," I said. It sounded insane. "He was paying for the clinic's silence and for their complicity," Ethan corrected. "And it appears Dr. Porter was part of that complicity. What you have here, this logbook, it's the Rosetta Stone. It connects the money to the motive. It proves a conspiracy to commit medical fraud." He looked at me with sincere empathy. "With your testimony and Dr. Lyle's, we can take this to the Attorney General. We can stop him. We can stop the hospital." I nodded. "I will testify. I will give you Dr. Lyle. I will give you everything. But I have one condition." Ethan leaned forward. "Name it." "You don't move until I say so. He's trying to kick me out of my house. He's telling his colleagues I'm unstable. He thinks he's in complete control. I will not let this happen in a quiet deposition. I will not be vindicated in a sealed letter from the medical board 6 months from now. He wants to erase me. I want to be the one to expose him, in public, in front of the people whose respect he values more than me, more than his children. I want to control the timing. Ethan looked at Marjorie, who just shrugged. She's the victim, Ethan. She gets to set the terms of the confrontation. You get the case. She gets the venue. Ethan thought for a long moment. Okay, Mrs. Hall, you have my word. You tell us when, but when you do, you have to be prepared for the fallout. It will be immediate. I'm counting on it, I said. The opening came 3 days later. My phone buzzed with an email. It was from Adrian. He had, insultingly, CC'd Celine. Subject house transition. Riley. The email read, Celine and I have selected some core furniture pieces. I've attached the mood board so you can see the direction we're going. We're favoring a minimalist, Scandinavian look. Just wanted to keep you politely in the loop. Hope your search for a new place is going well. Attached were photos of sleek, low-profile sofas in shades of gray, minimalist light fixtures, and one photo of a large empty wall with the caption, Gallery Wall Installation Here. They wanted to send me updates. Like I was a departing tenant, they were graciously accommodating. The condescension was so profound, it was almost laughable. They were so sure I was defeated. I hit reply. Adrian, this looks beautiful. You both have wonderful taste. But this whole thing feels so abrupt. Your colleagues are going to talk. Me just vanishing. It looks bad for you. It looks like a scandal. I let the line hang for a moment, baiting the hook. Why don't we do this the right way? You've always wanted to host the board and the department heads for a showcase. Let's do that. Let me help you coordinate it. We can present a united, conscious uncoupling front. It's the civilized way to handle this. It protects your image. Then, after, I can move out, and it all looks seamless. His reply came in under 5 minutes. Riley, that is an incredibly mature and excellent idea. I'll have my assistant coordinate dates with the board. Thank you. He was so arrogant. He couldn't see the trap. He thought I was coordinating my own surrender party. He was coordinating his own execution. That afternoon, I did 2 things. I went to the bathroom, collected a handful of hair follicles from Adrian's electric razor, and then I took a sterile cheek swab from my son, telling him it was a routine strep check. I sent them both to a private 24-hour DNA lab in another state, paying for the paternal exclusion test with a prepaid credit card. Then, I went online. I found a custom framing shop. I ordered the largest, most expensive, museum-quality frame they offered, a solid, heavy block of dark walnut, 36 inches wide by 48 inches tall. I had the proof, I had the venue, and now I had the frame. If he wanted a new living room to show off to the medical elite, I was going to give him a piece of wall art they would never forget. I timed my entrance. I waited until I heard their voices coming from the living room, the one Celine had already itemized for demolition. I had been upstairs, in the master bedroom, methodically folding sweaters into a cardboard box, a performance of compliance. I walked down the main staircase, my footsteps silent on the thick runner. They were standing by the fireplace, his hand on the small of her back. Celine was holding a fan of paint chips against the wall, the one I had painted a warm ivory only 2 years ago. The undertones in this are all wrong, she was saying, her voice crisp and dismissive. It's too provincial. We need something sharp, a clean, architectural white. That color is a little cold, don't you think? My voice, light and airy, sliced into the room. They both froze. Adrian snatched his hand back from her as if he'd been burned. Celine turned, her body stiff, her face a mask of poorly concealed shock. She was wearing a black leather jacket and jeans that probably cost $1,000. She was dressed for an invasion. Riley, Adrian said, his voice tight with annoyance and embarrassment. I thought you were upstairs. I was, I said, walking toward them, forcing a bright, wide smile. But I heard voices. Celine, hi, it's so good to see you. Here, in the house. I gestured broadly around the room. The picture of the gracious, slightly clueless wife. Please, make yourself at home. You might as well. I'm just sorting things out before I move, and you're clearly getting a head start. My absolute lack of hysteria was, I could tell, more terrifying to her than if I had thrown a lamp. Celine, a woman who I sensed lived on power plays and confrontation, looked unnerved. She didn't know the rules to this particular game. Adrian, however, recovered quickly. He was a surgeon. He was used to being in charge. Even when things went wrong, he mistook my calm for surrender, my practicality for weakness. He saw it as his opening to establish the new order. He put his hand back on Celine's back, a deliberate, defiant gesture of ownership. Exactly. We need to be clear about the new terms. Riley, it's better this way. After the paperwork is finalized, Celine will be moving in. He gestured to the room around them. And we're going to be entertaining a lot more. Celine agrees with me that this house has been criminally underutilized. She wants to open it up for colleagues, host proper dinners for the Ravenscrest board, for the donors. He was literally in front of me, stating her social ambitions. I looked at Celine, my smile still painfully bright. Oh, a salon. How very ambitious. You're not just an anesthesiologist, you're a society hostess. That's a big step up from the surgical wing. Celine flushed, a dull red creeping up her neck. She sensed the insult, but didn't know how to parry it without looking petty. It's about networking, Riley, she said, her voice sharp. Something you might not understand. We need a space that reflects Adrian's status. My status, Adrian corrected, his chest puffing slightly. This was it, the exact, perfect opening. I let my smile falter, replacing it with a look of manufactured concern, aimed entirely at him. No, she's absolutely right. Adrian, I said, my voice dropping. And that's precisely why my just vanishing is a terrible idea. He frowned, not following. What are you talking about? The gossip, I said, widening my eyes, playing the part of the savvy social coordinator. Think about it. The hospital, the club, the school, me moving out, her moving in, all in a matter of weeks. It looks like a cheap, messy, midlife crisis affair. It undermines the very status you're trying to build. It looks desperate. It makes you look weak. I saw his jaw tighten. I had hit the nerve. He could tolerate being called cruel, but never weak or desperate. You need to control the narrative, I continued, beginning to pace the room, as if I were planning one of my high-stakes corporate events. You shouldn't be hiding this. You should be announcing it. You're starting a new, vibrant chapter. You're refreshing your entire life. You should host a party to show it off. A party? Celine asked, her eyes narrowing, suspicious of this Trojan horse. Not just a party, I said, turning to Adrian, playing directly to his ego. A showcase, a housewarming for the new decor. You invite the people who matter. The entire Ravenscrest board. Dr. Marlowe. Get Gavin Roth from finance. You've been wanting to impress him for the Capital Steering Committee. You invite the department heads, especially, I added, glancing at Celine. The OB/GYN and anesthesiology teams, the people who know you both, the ones you've worked with for years. I let the implication hang, the ones who knew you from Westlake. It shows transparency, I pressed on. It shows confidence. We introduce Celine as your new partner, formally. We present this as a modern, mature, conscious uncoupling. It's the civilized way to handle this. It protects your image. I can even say a few words. Wish you both well. And then I gracefully bow out. No scandal, just elegance. You get to debut your new life and your new, beautifully decorated house at the same time. Adrian was silent, but I could see the idea blooming behind his eyes. He was visualizing it him, the master of his universe, standing in his revitalized home, his brilliant, beautiful new partner at his side, and me, his compliant ex-wife, graciously passing the torch. It was the perfect narrative. It was everything his ego craved. That, Adrian said, a slow, self-satisfied smile spreading across his face as he looked at Celine, is actually brilliant. It's perfect. It's exactly what we should do. Celine's suspicion evaporated, replaced by the giddy, triumphant thrill of a coronation. This wasn't just a housewarming. It was her public debut. This was her ascension. We can do it in 2 weeks, she jumped in, all business, immediately taking charge. The new sofa arrives on Tuesday. I've ordered a custom console from Denmark. And the main wall. That wall. She pointed to the large, blank space above the fireplace. I'm designing a full gallery wall. Photos. Important prints. It will be the centerpiece of the entire room. A gallery wall, I asked, feigning helpful interest. What size for the main piece? I have an excellent framer I use for my events. He's expensive, but fast, and very discreet. I could, as a parting gift, get the central frame for you. Celine looked at Adrian, who nodded, magnanimous in his victory. Yes, that would be helpful, she said, slightly thrown. I was planning the central piece to be large, about 36 by 48 inches. The exact dimensions I had already ordered. Perfect, I said, making a small, fake note on my phone. Consider it handled. Later that afternoon, I was in the kitchen, ostensibly making a list for the caterer. I had, of course, insisted on handling all the logistics. It's my last event for this family, I'd said. Let me do it right. Celine came in alone, pouring herself a glass of sparkling water from the refrigerator as if she'd been doing it for years. She leaned against the counter, radiating a smugness she was barely trying to conceal. You're handling all of this really well. Riley, she said. It wasn't a compliment. It was a probe, a test. I have to admit, I'm surprised. Moving out of your home like this, it can't be easy. I stopped writing. I looked up at her. Meeting her gaze, I gave her a small, tight smile. Oh, it's not. There's a lot to process, but I'll be fine in the end. I tapped my pen on the notepad. I just want to make sure the transition is smooth. My only real concern, honestly, is making sure the right things are hung on the wall. You know how important presentation is, especially for an audience like this. I held her gaze. As long as everything that needs to be seen is put in its proper place, I'll be perfectly fine. Her smile wavered, just for a second. She didn't understand the words, but she felt the chill. Adrian, on the other hand, was ecstatic for the next week. He was generous. He was so glad I was being mature about this. He told me I was a good woman and that he would always respect me as the mother of his children. He was so completely blinded by his own towering arrogance, so convinced that my compliance was the ultimate proof of his superiority, that he didn't see the jaws of the trap closing around him. He didn't know that I had already checked his private hospital calendar, the one synced to his phone. I saw the entry for the day after our little showcase, a private luncheon. Final Review Pioneer in Cardiothoracic Ethics Award. An ethics award. The timing was so exquisite, it was almost poetic. A scandal landing 12 hours before that meeting wouldn't just be embarrassing, it would be a career-ending detonation. I sat at my laptop in the guest room, surrounded by half-packed boxes. I opened my encrypted email client. The DNA results had arrived. Paternal exclusion 0.0%. The email was to Ethan Cole and Marjorie Hale. Subject: the premiere. It's scheduled. Next Friday at 8 p.m. I'm sending you the guest list. He's invited the entire hospital board, including Marlowe and Roth. It's the showcase. My event team will be catering, so your people can pose as staff. I'll have the primary evidence framed and on the wall before 9 p.m. Get your people ready. The show is about to start. The week leading up to the showcase was a blur of tactical coordination. I was operating on pure, cold adrenaline. I was not just coordinating a party, I was stage managing an execution. While Celine was busy ordering floral arrangements and Adrian was practicing his humble brag speech for the party, I was moving the final pieces into place. Ethan Cole called me on Tuesday. His voice was no longer just empathetic. It was hard. We have the full money trail, Riley, he said, the absence of any preamble telling me it was serious. It's exactly as you suspected. only cleaner and much, much worse. He explained, the Ravenscrest Pioneer Fund, a charitable foundation Adrian himself chaired, supposedly for funding high-risk research and community health, had been making substantial six-figure payments every quarter for 5 years to a single recipient, my husband's private LLC, Silverline Wellness Group. The transfers were officially categorized as community outreach grants for underserved patients. It was a slush fund, Ethan said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Pure and simple. It wasn't supporting patients. It was a black box. We now believe he was using hospital donor money to buy Westlake's silence, pay off dissenters like Dr. Lyle, and manage the entire conspiracy. He was laundering the hospital's own money to fund his fraud. And it gets better, he continued. Your conversation with Lyle. It gave him the courage to reach out to a former colleague, a nurse, Paula Green. She was a senior scrub nurse in the retrieval unit at Westlake. She's terrified, but she's willing to talk now that she knows she's not alone. Paula had corroborated everything. She'd witnessed the protocol deviations. She'd seen samples logged incorrectly on purpose. She remembered Dr. Marcus Lyle arguing, fighting, and then, suddenly, being gone. And I asked her specifically about Dr. Celine Porter, Ethan said. I held my breath. Paula remembers her distinctly, the brilliant, ambitious rotator who was always in Dr. Blake's shadow. Paula confirmed Celine was integral to the cover-up, especially during the second round of your procedures. When Lyle started refusing to alter the paper logs, Celine was the one who cleaned up the digital records. She buried the discrepancies. She was the one who handled the final destruction of the original files. So she was his accomplice, I whispered. She was his paid accomplice, Ethan corrected. Paula said the rumor among the senior staff was that Celine was getting discretionary bonuses from the program. We checked Silverline's outflow. Riley, we found them, monthly transfers, starting 3 years ago, long before she officially transferred to Ravenscrest. They weren't going to Celine Porter, of course. They were going to a shell company, a tiny, registered in Delaware LLC named, get this, Aesthetic Concepts Interiors. I almost dropped the phone. The bitter, acidic taste of laughter rose in my throat. Aesthetic Concepts Interiors. The woman he was bringing in to redecorate my home had been laundering her hush money through a fake interior design company. The brazen, suffocating irony of it was perfect. She's not just the other woman, I said. She's a co-conspirator. She's the beneficiary of a wire fraud conspiracy. Yes, Ethan replied. Which brings us to the party. After I hung up, I immediately called Marjorie. She let out a low, satisfied whistle when I told her about Aesthetic Concepts Interiors. Oh, this is beautiful, she purred, the legal gears in her mind spinning audibly. A financial co-conspirator, and he's actively moving her into the marital home while planning a divorce, Riley. This is a gift. We can now argue that his request for you to move out isn't just about the affair. It's a calculated attempt to conceal evidence and commingle fraudulent assets with a known accomplice. He's housing his partner in crime. A judge will despise that. I went to my home office. My printer had been working overtime. I already had the high-resolution certified copy of the DNA report alleged father. Probability of paternity. I had the crystal-clear scan of Marcus Lyle's logbook, with Adrian's unmistakable signature next to the specimen replacement approved notation. Now, I added the final pieces to the collection. I printed the bank statement from the Ravenscrest Pioneer Fund, showing the $250,000 grant transfer to Silverline Wellness Group, and right below it, I printed the Silverline statement, showing the $15,000 payment from Silverline to Aesthetic Concepts Interiors. It was a perfect 4-part story of deception, medical battery, and wire fraud. My exhibit was complete. I was feeling in control. I was feeling righteous. I was, for the first time, feeling powerful. And that is when he struck back. It was Wednesday afternoon. The kids were at soccer, a sleek black town car, not a normal courier van. Pulled into our driveway. A man in a sharp suit rang the bell. He didn't ask me to sign. He just handed me a stiff, legal-sized envelope and said, "You've been served, ma'am." It wasn't from Marjorie. It was from his new legal team, the most expensive, ruthless corporate firm in Maple Ridge, the one that defended chemical companies and hostile takeovers. My hands were perfectly steady as I tore it open. It was an ex parte emergency motion, filed in secret, without my knowledge. I read the words, my vision narrowing, the blood draining from my face. Alleges respondent Riley Hall is exhibiting signs of severe mental and emotional instability. Behavior has become erratic, paranoid, and volatile, creating an unsafe and unstable environment for the minor children. He was painting me as the danger. He was twisting my shock, my grief, my anger, the very emotions he had caused, into evidence of my insanity. And then, the payload. Respectfully requests the court to issue an immediate temporary order preventing respondent from removing the minor children from the state of pending a full psychological evaluation. He was trying to trap me. He was building his case. He knew my entire family. My whole support system was in the Midwest. He was preemptively cutting me off, isolating me, and branding me as crazy before I could even make the first move. This was his opening salvo in the custody battle. He was preemptively poisoning the well, ensuring that when I did reveal the truth, he could just point and say, "See, Your Honor." The paranoia I told you about. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat in the living room, surrounded by Celine's sterile, gray furniture, which had been delivered that day. His move didn't make me want to back down. It solidified my entire strategy. He wanted to tell a judge I was unstable. Fine. I would give the entire Ravenscrest Medical Center board a front-row seat to why I would not let this fight happen in a sealed courtroom where his charm and his lawyers could twist the narrative. I would have it in the court of his peers. His reputation had to be a smoking crater before he ever got the chance to question my psychological state. I called Ethan. "He's trying to take my children," I said, my voice like ice. "He's filed a motion. He's calling me unstable. The party is non-negotiable. There is no backing down." "I understand," Ethan said, his voice grim. "This confirms the stakes. My team is ready. I will be there, as will 2 of my senior civil investigators. We will be dressed as guests, mingled with the crowd. We will not act until you give the signal, but the moment you do, we will secure the scene. We will be serving him, Dr. Porter, and any hospital board members present with official notice of the investigation." The massive 36 by 48-inch walnut frame I had ordered was delivered the next day. It was wrapped in thick brown paper, marked Fragile Gallery Art. I took it to the guest room and locked the door. I put on a pair of white cotton gloves, one by one. I mounted the 4 documents onto a stark black velvet backing: the DNA test, the logbook signature, the Ravenscrest transfer, the Celine transfer. It looked like a museum exhibit, an exhibit on the total collapse of a man's ethics. I practiced it. I practiced lifting the heavy frame, the muscles in my arms straining. I practiced walking with it. I practiced the single, fluid motion of turning it around. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, my face calm, and rehearsed the one sentence I would use to stop the entire party. He wanted me to move out of this house, but before I took a single step out that door, his guests, his employers, and his co-conspirator were going to find out exactly why I was leaving. The house was unrecognizable. Celine, with what Adrian praised as her flawless, clean aesthetic, had managed to strip 14 years of my life from the walls in under 2 weeks. The warm, ivory paint was gone, replaced by a sterile, flat beige that seemed to absorb all the light in the room. Our comfortable, slightly worn sofas, where my children had built forts and I had read stories, were gone. In their place sat a low-profile, gray sectional that looked both expensive and profoundly uncomfortable. The air smelled wrong. It smelled of new carpet, chemical polish, and, overpoweringly, of white lilies. Huge, funereal arrangements of white lilies were everywhere, their scent thick and cloying. Celine had erased me and replaced me with a morgue. The showcase, however, was in full swing. My event company's catering staff, my trusted team, supplemented by two men I didn't know but recognized from Ethan Cole's file photos, moved silently through the crowd, with trays of champagne and elaborate canapes. The crowd was exactly who Adrian had wanted. It was the inner circle of Ravenscrest. Dr. Helena Marlowe, the hospital's CEO and medical director, was standing by the new, sterile fireplace. She was a woman who prized the hospital's reputation above all things. A scandal was, to her, a contamination. Across the room, sipping a club soda, was Gavin Roth, the CFO. He was the numbers man, the one who Ethan had told me was already suspicious of the Pioneer Fund's accounting. And scattered around them were the department heads, half a dozen cardiac surgeons who viewed Adrian as a god, and, crucially, a select group from OB/GYN and anesthesiology. I recognized two senior obstetricians who had been at Westlake during the time of my treatments. They were the jury. Adrian was magnificent. He was in his element, holding court in a bespoke Italian suit, his hand never leaving the small of Celine's back. She was triumphant, poured into a tight, cream-colored dress, her dark hair sleek. She looked every inch the new lady of the manor. They moved through the room as a unit, accepting congratulations, their performance flawless. I, on the other hand, was not playing the part they had cast me in. I was not the subdued, slightly tragic suburban wife. I had spent 2 hours on my appearance. I wore a severe, black sheath dress with a sharp V-neck. My hair was pulled back into a tight, polished chignon. My makeup was not soft. It was armor. I looked less like a woman being replaced and more like a CEO about to announce a hostile takeover. I saw Adrian spot me as I spoke with Dr. Marlowe. He smiled his brilliant, charming smile and steered Celine in our direction. "Helena," he boomed, kissing the air near her cheek. "Thank you for coming, and you've met Riley, of course, my dear friend, and the mother of my children." He placed his free hand on my shoulder, a gesture of patronizing ownership. "Riley has just been the most incredible support during this transition," he said, his voice resonating with false sincerity. "We're truly trying to show everyone how this can be done in a civilized, conscious way. She's been a rock." Dr. Marlowe, no fool, looked between the three of us, her eyes sharp and assessing. "How mature, Adrian, Riley. He's been so excited to show off the new direction," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "We are," Adrian said, puffing up. He raised his voice to get the room's attention. "Everyone, can I have your attention for just one moment?" The polite chatter died down. This was his speech, his coronation. "Thank you all for coming," he said, beaming. "Celine and we are just so thrilled to be starting this new chapter, and we wanted to share it with the people who matter most, the colleagues who have become family, this house. It's just a symbol of a new start, a fresh energy, and the kind of innovative spirit we try to bring to Ravenscrest every day." He was equating his affair with medical progress. The arrogance was breathtaking. He raised his glass. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," the room echoed. As the applause died down, I stepped forward from Dr. Marlowe's side. "Adrian, that was beautiful," I said, my voice clear and carrying into the sudden quiet. The room, which had been expecting me to fade into the wallpaper, turned its attention to me. "Before everyone gets another drink," I continued, "there's just one last thing, a housewarming gift. Celine," I turned to her, my smile bright and brittle. "I promised you I would handle the central piece for your gallery wall. What was it, 36 by 48? It was delivered this afternoon." I caught the eye of one of Ethan's men, who was posing as the catering captain. "Miguel, could you bring it in, please?" Celine, for the first time that night, looked flustered. This was not on her mood board. This was a variable she hadn't controlled. "Riley, really, this isn't the time. We can hang it later." The lighting isn't even set for that wall." "Nonsense," Adrian said, magnanimous, waving her objection away. He was high on his own performance. "It's her gift. Let's see it. Bring it in. Miguel." Miguel nodded and disappeared into the hall. He returned a moment later carrying a massive, heavy object wrapped in thick, brown craft paper, marked fragile. He set it gently against the wall, right below the central, empty hook Celine had designated. "Let me," I said, stepping forward. "I'll hang it myself. It's the least I can do." I walked to the frame. I could feel every eye in the room on me. Adrian was smiling, indulgent. Celine was tapping her foot, annoyed. Dr. Marlowe and Gavin Roth were watching. Just watching. I gripped the heavy frame. I tore the brown paper away in one loud rip. I lifted the heavy, dark walnut frame. It was heavier than I'd practiced with. I hoisted it up, my arms shaking just slightly from the weight and the adrenaline. I turned it around, facing the room, and slid it perfectly onto the heavy-duty hook Celine had installed. It was not art. It was not a painting. It was not a photograph. It was a single, stark white, professionally certified document, mounted on black velvet, illuminated by the very gallery light Celine had aimed at the wall. The room went utterly, profoundly silent. The kind of silence that happens in the seconds after a car crash, before the screaming starts. Gavin Roth, the CFO, who was standing closest, was the first to read it. His glasses slid down his nose. "My God," he whispered. In bold, clinical type at the bottom, the words were unmissable. Alleged father Dr. Adrian Blake. Probability of paternity, 0.0%. Someone in the back dropped a champagne flute. The shatter was deafening. Adrian's face was a grotesque mask of confusion. The charming smile collapsed. What is this?" he stammered, his voice rising in panic. "Riley, what is this joke?" He lunged for the frame. Take that down right now." I put one hand, palm flat, against the walnut frame, stopping him. My voice was suddenly the only sound in the room. It was not loud, but it was so cold, it cut through everything. "Don't touch it, Adrian. It's evidence." As his hand was still raised, his mind still reeling from the DNA report, I used my other hand. My phone was already in it. I had, of course, used my event coordinator skills to access the home's new smart network earlier that day, under the guise of setting up the music. I pressed a single button. The giant, 80-inch television screen Celine had installed above the sterile fireplace flickered. The tasteful looping video of an abstract screensaver vanished. It was replaced by a crystal-clear image of the logbook from Westlake. Blown up, 6 feet tall, was Dr. Marcus Lyle's handwriting, and next to it, Adrian's arrogant, unmistakable signature. Specimen replacement approved. A. Blake. "What is that?" Dr. Marlowe said, her voice like ice. Before Adrian could answer, I hit the next button. The screen changed. It was the bank statement. The transfer. Ravenscrest Pioneer Fund to Silverline Wellness Group. Gavin Roth let out a small, choking sound. That's the grant transfer." "And finally," I said, my voice resonating with a terrible, calm finality, I hit the last button. The screen changed again. The bank statement from Silverline. The transfer out. Payee Aesthetic Concepts Interiors. Celine made a sound, a small, strangled gasp. The room didn't just go silent. It shattered. It was no longer a party. It was an indictment. Adrian's face, which had been a mask of triumphant charm, was now a horrifying landscape of white-hot panic and utter confusion. He took a step back, as if the wall itself had struck him. This is a private matter," he yelled, his voice cracking, losing its surgical precision. He turned to his guests, his colleagues, his employers, with a desperate, sweeping gesture. "This is a domestic dispute, a lie. She's unwell. I must ask you all to leave. Please, give us some privacy." People began to shift. their shoes whispering on the new, sterile carpet, their faces a mixture of horror and embarrassment. They looked at the door, desperate to escape the blast radius. "I don't think so, Adrian." "Doctor—" Helena Marlowe's voice was not loud, but it was so cold and absolute that it stopped every person in the room. She had not moved. She was still standing by the fireplace, her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the television screen displaying the Ravenscrest Pioneer Fund transfer. When I see my hospital's name, my foundation's name on a screen next to a fraudulent LLC and an unauthorized payment to an anesthesiologist's shell company, it ceases to be a domestic dispute, she said, her voice dropping to a lethal, quiet register. It becomes a hospital matter. Everyone will please stay exactly where you are. The room froze again. The invisible doors had been locked. I took a single step forward, away from the wall, into the center of the room. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. The adrenaline was a clean blue flame. "He's right," I said, my voice carrying into the thick, toxic silence. "It is a domestic dispute. It's just a very long one." I turned my gaze from Adrian and looked at Dr. Marlowe, at Gavin Roth, at the assembled faces of the medical elite. "This dispute started 14 years ago," I said, my voice clear and measured. "When I put my career in communications on hold, when I dropped out of my master's program, so he could focus on his, so he could become the superstar surgeon you all admire." Adrian's face was slick with sweat. "Riley, don't do this." "It continued 8 years ago," I said, ignoring him. "When we were desperate for a child, when we went to Westlake, the program he insisted on, the program this hospital funded, and it's where my husband, the man you are about to give an ethics award to, made a unilateral medical decision. He decided that I would not be carrying his biological child." A collective, sharp intake of breath hissed through the room. The OB/GYN doctors looked like they had been physically struck. "He signed a form," I said, pointing to the television, to the logbook image. "Without my consent, to have my embryos created with a stranger's DNA, because he was afraid of passing on his own flawed genetics. He didn't tell me. He let me believe for 8 years that the children I was raising were mine and his. He committed medical battery on his own wife." I let the words hang, letting them soak into the expensive new beige walls. "And the dispute," I continued, my voice hardening, "came to a head 2 weeks ago, when that same superstar surgeon told me to move out of this house, the house I built, the home where I am raising those children. He told me to leave, so his mistress, his co-conspirator, could have a fresh space to decorate." I finally looked at Adrian, at the man who was now just a shell. His charm evaporated. "I'm not doing this for revenge, Dr. Marlowe. I'm doing this because he was about to file a court motion declaring me an unstable mother to take my children away from me. I just wanted the people who sign his paychecks, the people who hold his reputation in their hands, to know how he really treats his family, and how he really treats his patients." Celine, who had been frozen in a rictus of horror, suddenly sprang to life. "This is insane!" she shrieked, her voice high and thin. "She's lying. She's faked this. I don't know anything about this. I wasn't even at Westlake then, Adrian. Tell them she's lying." "You don't know anything about it." "Celine?" I asked, my voice genuinely curious. I looked at the television screen, still glowing with the bank transfer. "That's strange, because Aesthetic Concepts Interiors seems to know quite a lot. $15,000. Is that your standard fee for cleaning up digital records? Or was that just a down payment for redecorating this room?" As Celine's face turned white, the man I knew as Miguel stepped forward, along with the 2 guests I recognized from Ethan's photos. "Dr. Blake, Dr. Porter," Ethan Cole said, his voice calm, authoritative, and projecting easily across the room. He held up a badge. "I'm Investigator Ethan Cole, with the State Medical Board. These are my colleagues from the Attorney General's Civil Fraud Division." A new wave of panic rippled through the guests. This was no longer a personal drama. This was a criminal investigation. "We are conducting a formal investigation," Ethan continued, into a conspiracy to commit medical fraud, wire fraud, and the misappropriation of charitable funds involving the Ravenscrest Medical Center, the Westlake Reproductive Institute, and a private entity known as Silverline Wellness Group. He nodded to his colleagues. One moved to stand by the television, the other by the framed DNA test on the wall. "We are serving you both with official notice, and we are securing this room. These materials," he gestured to the wall and the TV, "are now evidence." Dr. Marlowe took a slow, deliberate step toward Adrian. Her face was pale, her fury a contained, nuclear force. "You looked me in the eye. Adrian," she whispered, her voice shaking with rage. "You sat in my office. You told me the Westlake partnership was clean and revolutionary. You used my hospital's donor fund. You used my name to build this." Adrian, cornered, his reputation atomized in front of his employers, finally fell back on his last, twisted defense. "I did it to protect my children," he roared, his voice breaking. "I have the gene. The HCM marker, I've seen what it does. I spend my entire life cutting it out of other people's chests. I could not, pass that on. It was a medical decision. I was protecting them from a lifetime of risk, from sudden death. It was my right as a father." "It was not your right," I shouted back, the first trace of my own 14-year-old rage finally breaking through the ice. "It was our decision, and you stole it from me. Protection isn't lying to your wife for 8 years. Protection is not committing medical battery and signing a consent form in her name. You didn't do it for them. Adrian, you did it for you. You couldn't stand the idea of a flawed legacy. You wanted perfect children, just like you wanted a perfect house and a perfect, trendy partner. You didn't protect me. You violated me." "My God," a man near the back said. It was Dr. Allister, one of the senior obstetricians who had been at Westlake. He was staring at the TV screen, at the logbook. That's Marcus Lyle's signature. I'd know that handwriting anywhere." He looked at his colleagues, his face ashen. We all knew something was wrong. The success rates, the data. It was always too good. The numbers were abnormal. We thought he was just a genius. But my God, he was cheating. They were all cheating. Celine saw her opening. With all eyes on Adrian and the doctors, she turned on me, her face a mask of viciousness. "You're just jealous," she spat. "You're a bitter, pathetic, suburban housewife who couldn't keep her husband. So you're making all this up. You hacked his computer, you faked these documents. You're insane. That's what you are." It was the very word he had used in his court filing. "Am I?" I asked, still holding my phone. I pressed the next button on the remote. The screen flashed again. It was the final exhibit, an email from Adrian's archived hospital client to Celine's personal email account, dated 3 years prior. Subject IVF paperwork. R. Hall, Cycle 2. The text was damningly simple. "Celine, Lyle is being difficult. I need you to handle the final log for the transfer on the 12th. Make sure the primary file is cleaned per our discussion. I'll handle your bonus through the usual channel." The room, Celine's beautifully decorated, sterile beige room, had become a courtroom. The party was over, the guests were the jury, and the verdict was in. Adrian Blake stared at the screen, at the email, at the bank transfers, at the DNA test on his wall. The god had been pulled from the pedestal. He was no longer a surgeon. He was just a criminal, standing in the wreckage of his life. He turned to me. His face was no longer pale. It was a deep, mottled red. All that was left was a raw, primal rage. He lunged, not at the frame, but at me. "Riley," he screamed, his hands formed into claws. You will regret this. You will not get a single cent. You will never see those children again. You'll regret this." Ethan Cole put a firm hand on his chest, stopping him easily. I didn't flinch. I didn't even step back. I looked him right in the eye. My voice very, very quiet. So quiet he had to stop struggling to hear it. "No, Adrian, I don't think I will. You're the one who is about to move out. Not just from this house. You're moving out of the hospital. You're moving out of the board. And you're definitely moving out of that ethics committee. You're the one who is about to lose everything." Ethan Cole's phone buzzed, a low, sharp vibration against his hip. He had his hand on Adrian's chest, holding him back, but his eyes flickered to the screen. It was the signal. The perimeter team, working with the local PD, was in place. He looked up, his gaze sweeping past me to the investigators by the wall. He nodded. "Dr. Blake, Dr. Porter," Ethan announced, his voice snapping the room to attention. "My superiors have reviewed the evidence. They agree there is probable cause to believe a felony has been committed. We will be temporarily seizing all personal electronic devices and computers in this home, and we require you both to come downtown for formal questioning. Tonight." Celine let out a high-pitched, strangled sob. "No, I have an early shift. You can't." Adrian was silent, his mind finally, rapidly, processing the full scope of the disaster. But before he could formulate a response, Dr. Helena Marlowe delivered the blow that truly mattered. "The questioning won't impact his hospital status. Investigator," she said, her voice sharp as obsidian. She turned her full, undivided attention to the man she had championed for a decade. "Because it is no longer relevant." She took a step toward Adrian. "Dr. Blake, effective immediately, as of this moment, you are indefinitely suspended from all patient contact, all research oversight, and all surgical privileges at Ravenscrest Medical Center, pending the outcome of this investigation. Suspended." If Ethan's announcement was a gunshot, hers was the bullet. I watched Adrian absorb it. It was not the threat of jail time that broke him. It was not the loss of his marriage. It was that single word, suspended. He was a surgeon. It was not a job. It was his entire identity. It was the armor he wore, the title he used as a shield and a sword, and she had just stripped it from him. Not in a private, sterile HR meeting, but here, in his own living room, in front of his subordinates, his peers, his employers, and his mistress. He had built his entire life on the foundation of his public image, and she had just demolished it at the very showcase he had designed to celebrate it. He staggered back, his hand falling from my frame. He looked hollow. The god in the Italian suit was gone. In his place was just a terrified, hollowed-out man. I glanced at Celine. The fight had gone out of her. Her eyes were darting around the room, at the new gray sofa, the Danish console, the sterile beige walls. This was not the stage for her debut. It was a crime scene. She was not the ambitious new partner. She was the woman on the bank transfer, the one paid via Aesthetic Concepts Interiors. She had hitched her wagon to a falling star, and she was only now realizing she was tied to his ankle. Her dream house had become her indictment. The guests, the frozen audience, finally began to move. It was a silent, mass exodus. They moved like ghosts, filing out of the room, their faces averted. They wouldn't look at Adrian. They wouldn't look at Celine. And they wouldn't look at me. They just wanted to be gone, to escape the contamination. This, I knew, was Adrian's true hell. It wasn't the loss of his money. It was the loss of their respect. It was the awkward silence, the averted eyes, the polite horror. He was no longer the brilliant surgeon. He was a social pariah, a scandal, a piece of distasteful gossip they would be whispering about by morning. As the crowd thinned, Adrian's gaze fell on me. The panic was gone, replaced by a final, desperate, reptilian flicker of calculation. He took a step toward me, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial hiss, as if we were still a team. "Riley," he whispered, "stop this. Please, we can talk about this. Just us. We can go to Marjorie. You can have the house. You can have whatever you want. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you were upset. We can fix this." He still thought it was a negotiation. He still thought he had something to offer me. I looked at him, at this stranger who had shared my bed, at the father of my children, at the man who had violated my body and my trust in the most profound way imaginable. "I am keeping the house, Adrian," I said, my voice as calm and quiet as his. "It is my children's home. You will not be staying here tonight, or any other night." I watched his face crumble as he understood. I was not bargaining. "As for fixing this," I said, "you're right. You should talk to someone. You should call your lawyer. Dr. Marlowe was the last guest to leave." She paused at the doorway, her hand on the frame. She looked at the wreckage of the room, at Celine weeping into her hands, at Adrian standing shell-shocked by the fireplace, at the two investigators quietly bagging laptops, and finally, at me. She didn't say anything. She just gave me one slow, deliberate nod. It was not apology. It was not pity. It was, I realized, a look of grim, absolute respect. Then she was gone. The room was quiet, except for the sound of packing tape. Ethan approached me. "Mrs. Hall, will be taking these, and will be escorting them downtown." "Thank you, investigator," I said. I was alone in the room. Celine's funereal lilies, Celine's cold, gray sofa, and my exhibit. I walked over to the wall. The heavy walnut frame was tilted, just slightly, from where Adrian had lunged and hit it. My hands were perfectly steady. I reached up and adjusted the frame, centering it on the hook, making it perfectly level. I stepped back, admiring my work. "There," I said, loud enough for Adrian and Celine to hear over her sobs. "I've hung this. The wall is finished. It doesn't need any more decoration." The final image of him is the one I will keep. Dr. Adrian Blake, standing defeated in the center of the minimalist showcase his mistress had built for him, trapped, surrounded by the sterile, new furniture that represented his future, and staring at the wall where his wife had hung his past, his crimes, and his destruction. I turned and walked out of the living room. I walked down the hall I had painted. Past the staircase my children ran down every morning. I walked to the front door, not as the woman being exiled, but as the owner of the house, seeing the last, unwelcome guests out. He wanted to erase me. He wanted to scrub every trace of my influence from these walls, to create a fresh space. I stopped at the threshold. I looked back at him one last time, a prisoner in his own, new living room. "You told me you didn't want to see me in this house anymore, Adrian," I said. "But from now on, every time you see a blank wall, for the rest of your life, you will remember what I hung on this one. You will remember I was here, and you will remember that I was the one who had the final say in the decoration." Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Zoe Revenge Stories, like this video, and show your support by hitting that hype button so more people get to hear this.